Okay, the agenda we've got for today's workshop was passed out in the kind of the additional material here that you received today. We'll plan to follow that agenda. First thing I need to do is introduce our new board member, Janet Ayers. Janet, we're pleased to have you on the board. Already been some comments made about the improvement that has occurred. We won't get into that. Janet is president of the Ayers Foundation. She's chairman of Centerstone of Tennessee, and been actively involved in all kinds of community organizations. United Way. She's a former president of the Unicoi County United Way, former chairman of the Unicoi County Economic Development Board, and formerly a chair of the Unicoi County Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of good experience. She's got a BS degree from ETSU, East Tennessee State, in healthcare administration. So got some good roots in East Tennessee, between Johnson City, Unicoi County. So Janet, we're really pleased to have you as a member of the board.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Good.
Hope I can add something to it and build on what Jim started, I guess.
Yeah, great. Great. Well, we're pleased to have you, and look forward to that experience and adding to the great contributions that Jim made to the board. Danielle, I wonder if you could introduce our intern for us.
Sure. This is David Wolf. He's been with us since late May. This is his last week. He's been our legal intern for the summer. He's been doing great work, and we wish him the best as he goes back to start his second year of law school at Duke University.
Okay, great. Good to have you. Appreciate your work for the board.
Thank you.
Okay, the first item on the agenda was scheduling of meetings for next year, 2013. We've looked some at that, and our recommendation, coming from basically me and the staff, would be we follow essentially the same format we did this past year in terms of the timing of these meetings. To have the meeting for the first quarter on February the 1st. The second quarter meeting would be April the 19th. Third would be July 26th. And then the fourth quarter meeting, October the 25th. These are basically the same weeks that we met this past year, and I guess really have met for the last several years in that time frame. We would plan the same kind of format of having a workshop on Thursday, and then the meeting on Friday. The Friday is the dates that I just mentioned, and that meeting being, basically in the morning for those days. Any conflicts with that, or things that are prohibited to move forward with that plan for meetings for next year? Any known conflicts or things we need to program around? Okay, well, we'll stay with that schedule, and as always, we'll probably have some teleconferences in between and so forth that will be scheduled to fit agendas and to hopefully accommodate your other commitments. Okay, anything else on the meeting plan? Okay, is Chuck here? Chuck Cagle?
He called, said he was running a little late.
Okay, let's we'll get back to Chuck on the probationary license and move into the virtual school demonstration. Who will introduce that?
Howard.
Okay.
I'm good.
Mikey will do anything, right?
We have Dr. Keisha Ray with us. She's the Director of Instructional Technology for Metro Nashville Public Schools, and she's going to talk about the actual nuts and bolts of virtual schools and how they're doing it, some recommendations. Anything else to share?
having me. I do a little more than just direct the instructional technology for Metro Nashville Public Schools. And I think one of the things that has benefited the district in designing a virtual school is I teach the only course that's offered in the country on running virtual schools through the University of Maryland University College. So I designed that course in partnership with a gentleman out of Canada, and he and I, we designed that course 7 years ago, and it's been running ever since, and it runs for the purpose of training people who want to start virtual schools all across the country. We actually have people enrolled right now that are from Turkey and India, and so now we've gone worldwide. So hopefully what I have to share with you will be helpful and beneficial and shed a little light on what a virtual school can mean to a district. I didn't show a PowerPoint up here because I really thought, after talking to Danelle, that it would be more helpful if I could kind of breeze through and provide some context and then just answer some questions for you that you might have related to virtual schools. I can certainly talk about best practices. I can talk about what's going on in our state and what's going on across the country. And to some extent, Australia, England, and Canada. So, in Metro, we started our virtual school 2 years ago. We're going into our third year. So if you look on the first page, which is page 2, I guess, of your presentation, and I'll do this so you can see kind of where I'm at, you'll see that we were the first virtual public school to offer a high school diploma. We do enroll kids K through 12. Right now we're focused primarily on middle and high school. We have a curriculum for K through 5, but we haven't had any kids that have wanted to take advantage of that. We have highly qualified certificated teachers. That's all we hire. We take both full-time and part-time students. We take students in the county and out of the county. We have our own learning management system. We can talk a little bit more about that. So that's essentially the school, the facility where all the courses are housed. And then we have our own content. So we purchased our own content too. We didn't lease it. We own everything so that we know what the kids are being taught every single day. And then we also have developers that create original content. So for courses that you can't purchase off the shelf, so to speak, we have developers in my department that design those courses. And then this upcoming year, we're moving to blended, and we have a lot of people that will be developing across the district, which is another conversation all to itself. Underneath that first slide is the organization. That's how many people are actually working every day in the virtual school. There's a principal, a virtual principal. That's Dr. James Whitty. There are teachers. We have about 13 adjunct teachers that are teaching for us. We have one full-time teacher that teaches for us. We have a virtual instructional support specialist. That person's sole job is to support the teachers, to make sure that the teachers have the resources that they need and the professional development that they need to be successful in teaching virtually. Because it's a very different shift from teaching just like I am right now to having everything digital and online and making sure that everybody's on and when you think they're on and all that. You've probably been on enough conference calls to know people can drop off and you have no clue until you call their name and you're like, Keisha? Then we have a student support specialist, and his main job is to monitor the student. So he watches all the activity of the students every single day. And when students aren't turning their assignments in, he contacts the teacher and says, hey, did you notice these students haven't turned their assignments in on time? So he's watching every single day. He's logging into the learning management system. He's checking every single day to see what activity the kids have and checking into their courses. When they don't check in, then we have a counselor that works with them. And the counselor will reach out to them and ask them, what kind of problems are you having? Why aren't you checking into your class? Is the content overwhelming? Are you able to catch up? Is your computer not working right? Just kind of very basic questions. But that's the role of the counselor. The counselor is also helping make sure that they pick the right classes, because one of the things that we are very dedicated to, as would be any top quality virtual school, is the virtual school should not look any different than any other traditional school. you should be able to get the same types of courses out of them, the same quality teacher, the same extracurricular. Everything that you get on ground, as we call it, should be available online in the virtual school. So the counselor makes sure that all of that is taken care of. If they're seniors, then she's got to make sure they know when the college fair is and how to get FAFSA and all the things that you have to do to high school seniors. And then we have an administrative services manager, and she really runs the show. I mean, she just makes sure that everything works. That when the kids have technical issues, they come to my department. My department's the help desk for the virtual school, but this administrative services manager will contact my department and say, hey, we've had 10 kids that have submitted help tickets, and we noticed you haven't checked them yet, and is the system down, and things like that. So there's a lot of checks and balances in there. It's not just have them log in and wish for the best. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to make sure that they're successful. When we started, now I'm on this page, when we started the school, we opened to what we call hybrid, which is students that attend a traditional high school and need to catch a credit that they can't get in their traditional high school. So they can take that credit in the virtual school, they're still going to show up, let's just say HumeFog, they're still going to show up to HumeFog every day, but they'll log into a virtual class to catch that extra credit that they want. So that's called a hybrid student. And then we have full-time students. And full-time students, they don't ever come to a physical location unless they fall behind PACE. And I'll talk about that in a minute. When they fall behind PACE, then they have to come and show up and talk to a teacher and talk to a counselor and, be seen, be present, so to speak. The hybrid students, we have anywhere between 300 and 700 hybrid students in the last 2 years. So we have 20,000 students in our high schools, and out of the 20,000 students, we have about 500 or 700 that are going to try to get ahead, or the course that they want to take isn't available in their high school, and so they're going to be able to log in and take it virtually. They'll go to the library. Some of our high schools have designed virtual learning spaces where they can just go to that space and they'll have a proctor in that room that can be available to help the kids. But it's not the library. It's a space just for virtual school students to go to take their virtual class. And it's worked into their schedule, but they're not going to go to a classroom. They're going to go to this virtual lab and take their class. Our full-time students, we started out very intentionally with 20. And the reason we did that was if anything happened, because I was the principal the first year, if anything happened, I needed to make sure that I could teach every single one of those kids. So I couldn't afford to take 100 or 200 because I had a job, plus I was going to have to be a full-time teacher to these 20 students and find some staff to help me too. So I wanted, if a panic button went off for us to close the school, I didn't want those 20 kids to have to suffer for that panic button going off, right? So we started out very intentionally with 20 kids, and we made sure it worked. We involved their parents. We talked to their parents every single month. Their parents, finally we would call them and they'd say, do we have to meet again this month? We're like, yes. It's very important to make sure that the plans that we're making for this school are going to work, not just for your kids, but for kids for years to come. In that first group of kids, we actually had a country music celebrity student in there. And so they were out of county, so they had to drive in and participate. But what was wonderful about having their participation is the reason that they were in the virtual school was because they wanted their child to be able to travel with the father that was a celebrity and go to all the tours and shows. They were a senior and whatever. So they had a different perspective than some of the other kids that we had. And we were able to look at all the different perspectives of parents and kids so that when we designed the school, we didn't design it with kind of one profile in mind. We had 20 profiles in mind. And now we're able to scale because we can pretty much meet the needs of any given kid that comes our way. So last year we had almost 60 kids that were full-time students. And this year it was projected to be 70, but we actually have 115 enrolled full-time, which the principal was going to be here today, and that's what made him decide that he wasn't going to be able to be here today. He's like, oh my gosh, got 115 full-time kids. So preparing for 115 kids means he's going to have to hire more teachers. And what we've done with the virtual school is we've let it be open enrollment, so kids can still come in to the virtual school until the first day of school. So he really doesn't know what his real numbers are going to be. And for any principal, you know that can be a little bit mind-boggling because now he'll have to go out and find teachers. So he's doing okay. Now, if you don't mind, we'll flip. These are just all the laws and state board rules and regs that have been passed since we started our school to present. So we'll skip over to page 8. And that's the more practical application of what all of those rules and regs mean to a district. For us, what we did is we said, we want to know that the kids can be successful. Every kid won't be successful in a virtual school. It's not for every student. So what we said is, what's a factor that we can look at to know, to be a predictor on whether the student will be successful or not? And that predictor for us was the GPA. Because they have to be self-motivated. They have to be kids that are going to get up. Like my son would never be a virtual school student. I have to drag him out of bed. I have to, get him to school. Now, if he's going to a ball game, that's no problem. But if he's going to school, that's a little bit of effort. And if I wanted him to log in to check his course every day, I would literally have to stand behind him and say, come on, let's log in. He's not motivated for school. I'm very saddened by that, but as he says, I'm not wired that way. Okay. He will be one day. So what we said is they have to have a 2.0 GPA. That means they've at least engaged in some form or fashion in school. They at least have a commitment to study and do work and turn things in and kind of meet their deadlines, manage their time. So that's what we said for our full-time students. If they don't have a GPA of 2.0, they can get a waiver, but that waiver is coming from a principal or a counselor of the sending school. And that's so when that student begins to perform poorly, we can call them up and say, look, you kind of put it on the line and said you thought this child would do well in this environment, and they're not doing well. So what are we going to do about that? And 9 out of the 10 times, actually it's 10 out of 10 right now, the principal says, okay, we'll take them back. So they go back into a traditional school because they realize they just don't have the skill set to be that independent virtual learner. So on the next page, we talk about withdrawals. Now, our full-time students, they can withdraw it's just like any other school. They can withdraw just like any other kid can withdraw from any other school. Our out-of-county students, for full-time, now that the regs have changed, that'll be treated the same way. But for our part-time kids, that's a little bit differently. For all of our part-time students, which means they come in to take a class. Let's say we've got a lot from Cheatham County, Dixon County that come in. We have a couple from Obion County that are taking classes in our school. But we have an agreement with their director of schools on what's going to happen while the student is taking classes with us, and what are we going to do when the student is no longer successful? Who do we need to notify? What school are they going to go back into? Because you can't let the student just kind of fall. You got to pre-plan and think about, okay, what are we going to do when this doesn't work, right? So we do that, and we do that in the form of an MOU with the sending school district. For graduation requirements, page, I know I'm talking fast. On the next page, graduation requirements, we have 22.5 credits that we give, or that we require for graduation. The grading is exactly the same as it is for every other class and every other school in our district, so we don't do anything differently with grading. With testing protocols, I skipped over to page 12 now. With testing protocols, all of their tests are online. They're all administered in an online environment. But if there's a grade, if the test is worth more than 20%, then they have to come in and be proctored. So they're not going to take summative assessments online. They're going to come in, and that's going to be a proctored test. And the teacher that is teaching them virtually proctors that test. So for many of them, that's the first time they've met their teacher that they've had all semester, is when they take their test. Okay. For attendance, a minute ago, I talked about pacing. And what pacing means is, if you're given a syllabus, and that syllabus has 20 assignments, 2 tests, 1 project, you know in a 15-week or 12-week or 9-week period of time what work you need to do so that by the time you get to the end, you've checked off all those assignments. That's pacing. We tell the student, out of this period of time, these are the assignments that you have to do. Now, it's up to you when you do them. You can sit down tonight and you can do every single one of them. Odds are they're not going to be able to do that, but they think they are. My son would be like, yeah, let me get in there and do that. And then 5 minutes later he'd say, this is a lot of stuff. You're right. Maybe you need to pace yourself. So we have a schedule for them that tells them every single week what they need to be reading, what assignments they need to be completing, and how they need to be preparing for the test. Every single week. And the teacher checks every single week to see if the students are working on pace. When they're not working on pace, when they're not completing those assignments, when they're not doing what they need to do to prepare for their test or write their papers, then they become truant. That's how you measure attendance in a virtual class. So you can look in very, very small print, and I can email this to Danielle and get it digitally. But you can see that if they're 5 assignments behind, that's a beginning of a warning. That's, hold on, something's up. That means you've missed 1 week. That means you haven't checked in for 1 week. And that's a problem, right? In a traditional school, can kids be absent a whole week and a teacher not miss them? You would like to think that's not the case. So in a virtual school, that shouldn't be the case either. They have to check in every week, multiple times a week. If they're 10 assignments behind, then they're 2 weeks behind. 15, they're 3, and by the time they're 20, they can't recover. So we have procedures in play all along the way that capture that student and get them back on track. And by the time they've gotten about 3 weeks behind, that's a conversation about this may not be the choice for you. Now, if they've got 3 classes that they're taking and they're okay in 2 classes but not in 1, then that's a let's drop this class and focus on these. But if they're behind all across the board, then that's a discussion about whether this is a good fit for you. For academic integrity, that's the number 1 question. How do I know they're not cheating? Well, my number 1 answer is, how do I know a student that's sitting in front of me is cheating? I don't. So you put into play mechanisms to look at plagiarism. You put in discussion boards so that you can see their comments. You put in real-time connections like a video conference, what we could do here, a video conference or a phone conference where you can kind of hear them talking and you're like, when I ask them questions and they talk to me, they don't talk to me the same way they write. Mid-step, something's not right here. So you as a teacher put things into the process of teaching that class that help you measure that academic integrity, just like I do when I'm teaching face-to-face. I do the exact same thing. I don't know that the paper they hand in to me is the paper they wrote, or if it's a paper they got off the internet. I just don't know. Not today. So the same principles that you would put in play in a traditional class, you would put in play in a virtual class for academic integrity. We do have discussion boards that we monitor, and how the teacher communicates to the student is a big part of the teacher's evaluation. They have to talk to their students. They have to communicate regularly to their students. they have to pose questions. We follow the team rubric just like everybody else. So we're looking for all the elements of the team rubric in the course that they develop. That's why we bought our content, so that we can construct that course to meet the requirements of the team rubric, instead of having a course that's built and owned and managed by someone else that we can't control. We can't control their content, can't control their teacher. So we built it, and our teachers are trained in how do you apply your team rubric to teaching this class. For teacher pay, I mean, if it's a full-time teacher, they get paid what every other teacher in Metro gets paid. If they're not a full-time teacher, then we do pay them $2,500 a class that they teach. Now, that class can have an enrollment between 30 and 60 students. So their enrollment can vary. We're not quite to what we call rolling enrollment yet, but we do have where kids can register at any time and start their class at any time. And that teacher will teach this math class. It may start August 1. Another math class is going to start August 15th. Another math class August 23rd. So we do have that. Odds and ends for athletics. Any of our full-time students can participate in athletics in any of our zone schools. So any of our schools that have athletic programs, they can participate in that. We also make sure that they're aware of citywide athletic programs if they want to participate in that. We have extracurricular activities. We have a prom. We have dances. We have clubs. We have all the things that you would see in a traditional school in a virtual school. They are not virtual dances. They're real. They meet in person. They see each other. Some of the clubs are virtual, though. They do meet online and have, certain clubs online. We have field trips for them that they can go on. They're built into their class. So they get all the perks. We have graduation. They get all the things that a traditional high schooler or middle schooler would get. So the last slide is really, what's the difference between a vendor-based school, a district-based school, and a state-based school? And essentially, it is, it is quality of content. What you're going to get in a vendor-based school is the vendor owns and manages the content, the vendor owns and manages the teachers, and the vendor owns and manages the school. And you pay to have a seat in that school. For a district-based school, it is, if it's truly a district-based school where the district has a learning management system and they've purchased their content, then you're going to get content that is reviewed and owned by the school district. You're going to get teachers that are employed by the school district, and you're going to get a support system that's managed by the school district with state requirements considered. And then with a state-based system, typically the state-based systems are supplemental. They would be where we're running a system, and if you're not able to offer Spanish 2 or Latin 2, then we've got a class that you can take. They're very supplemental. No state, even Florida Virtual, offers a statewide school that has a diploma. Florida Virtual School, which is the most popular virtual school, they partner with their high schools, and they don't offer diplomas through their program. They essentially make their content available to the high schools, and then those high schools use their content, and the high schools give diplomas. So on the very last page is my contact information. If any of you have questions or comments or whatever, you can get in touch with me. I think we have 4 or 5 minutes for just general questions if you have any.
Questions for?
What is the cost
For a virtual school,
for, if
Yeah.
somebody wanted to take a course?
there is no cost.
Oh, I thought you said they paid to participate in the vendor-based.
Well, in the vendor-based, it can be anywhere from 350 a seat to 1,000 seats. It depends on the vendor.
Now, the K-12 program is a vendor.
That is a vendor program.
Yeah.
Right.
What's your track record for retaining students that enter, into the virtual learning environment?
In Metro Nashville?
Metro Nashville.
In Metro Nashville, we have, for our full-time students, we have only, I say lost, but only 3 students have returned back to the traditional program. And they were very intentional about their reason for coming into the virtual. One had surgery, and they knew they were going to have to be out for a whole year, so they enrolled in the virtual school and then went back. Another one had moved into the district in the middle of the year, and they didn't want to start school in the middle of the year, so they started virtual, and then they went to their traditional school. And the third one had a contract to be a motocross racer. And so he served his 1-year contract, and then he went back to his traditional school.
The minimum is 2 point,
Right.
which means they could be below grade level going in some of the courses. How does a teacher in a virtual situation handle getting this whole value add stuff which I still think's a myth. But anyway, where you're going to bring them up. How does that work?
In my opinion, it is easier to bring them up when you have them in a virtual environment than when you have them in a face-to-face environment. Because a virtual environment can be very individual and personalized. So I have 30 students in my class. 2 are falling behind. I can have different assignments for them. I can have coaching with them. I can pair them with another student. I can have even different curriculum for them. And nobody else in the room realizes that.
And still stay on pace.
And I can still stay on pace. Because I'm presenting it a different way. They may be different kinds of learners. And I can have that curriculum available for that kind of learner. So these kids prefer text. This one prefers media. I can differentiate that way.
So that answers my second question. Teacher evaluations are easier to do because some of it's more,
Oh, yeah.
it's a lot clearer. And then finally, you've had 2 years experience. How were your student outcomes compared to similar kids in similar demographics?
We're a passing school. So, and all of the kids that graduated, of the 20 kids, we had 8 that graduated from the first round of kids. Every single one of them started college. 2 of them started college as 17-year-olds. So they actually started college a year ahead of when they would have had they stayed in traditional school. But that was their goal. They want to go to law school, one wants to go to law school, and one wants to go to medical school.
Do you know what your value-added scores were for the school?
And I texted the people. Our announcement is at 1 o'clock today, and so I've texted like 8 people trying to get that, and they're like, the announcement's at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I think what I would say is, first of all, I'm very bullish on virtual schools for the long term. I think we've got a lot to learn, though, in order to get it right. And for me, I'm somewhat agnostic about who is the driver of the virtual school, as long as the school's good. You know, and there is a way to measure that by looking at value-added scores, because the students coming in can be at all different performance levels. And I think the benefit of a virtual school is actually meeting kids where they are in a way that allows them to advance at their own pace when it's done really well. But as with traditional schools, virtual schools are pretty variable right now in terms of their quality and their results. And I guess the last thing I'd add is I think about the long term. We've always thought about virtual schools as a gap filler for access. If kids can't access a particular kind of course, or kids can't get to school at all. Long-term virtual schools will become more about quality and accessing quality. And that day is coming faster than people think. Last year, there was a professor at Stanford who used to teach a class to 200 kids a semester, and he taught 150,000 students. And MIT is putting all of its lectures online for free. So it's hitting higher ed faster than it's hitting K-12, but I think we will move to a world at some point in the future. We will stop thinking of virtual schools simply as if a kid can't get access to something, and we'll start thinking about how do we get students access to the very best something. But we're a long way from there right now.
I would also add that if higher ed has moved to that model, which they have, then I believe it's our duty in K-12 to prepare our kids for that model. And if we don't expose them to any kind of opportunities like that, then when they get to school, to college, or even professional training schools, they're not going to have the skill set to be successful. And other states will have provided that.
I think several of our board members would be interested in knowing. I bet they're all familiar with the homebound model, we traditionally have used for kids who've been ill long-term or for various reasons, and maybe how this has helped change the landscape of that in the district, and even in terms of diversion of resources and money savings and that sort of stuff.
The best example that I have of that is a couple of third grade girls that have a disability that prevents them from being able to leave their home. We call them bubble kids, but they have some kind of disability that they cannot be in the sunlight. And these children, first of all, we put video conferencing on, and we let them broadcast with a traditional third grade class. But that can't happen all day, every day. So we also enrolled them in the virtual school. And so that was last year. Their health isn't where they can attend school right now. But last year, they were enrolled in the virtual school. Now, for K through 3, it's more kit-based, so they don't have to go online on the computer as much. They get a kit delivered to their home, and they kind of work through the kit. We had a homebound teacher that still would go to the school, but before the homebound teacher didn't really have a curriculum. They were having to go and pull from the school that the student had attended and put a curriculum together. Now they get a whole kit that's delivered that has the whole package curriculum, and they can follow that curriculum. And they can do that for every single homebound kid that's in the district. If they're middle and high school homebound kids, though, then we do enroll them in the digital side of the virtual school, and we still have a homebound teacher that goes and visits, but it's less frequent and more just to make sure that, is everything going okay? Is the program working for you? And we were able to take advantage of IDEA funds for that position. So that's really helped us out. And it's been helpful for exceptional ed kids that have behavior modification built into their IEP. They can only tolerate a half a day of school, and then they just can't take it anymore. It doesn't mean in the past they would have had to make it up somewhere along the way, and they became fifth-year graduates. That term rings a bell with a lot of it. Well, now we enroll them in the virtual school. They don't miss anything. They go home, they still log into school, so they don't miss anything.
Are they counted in these numbers?
They're considered part-time students, so they're counted in their traditional schools numbers. Not the only ones that are counted in the virtual school are the full-time students. All the part-time students, their numbers go back to their spending school. But that just adds to the kind of partnership that the schools have with one another to make sure the right kids are being placed in the program.
So the full-time students, their diploma is from the virtual school,
Correct.
not to sending school.
Correct.
And even those that are out of county, so.
Yes.
And what is the availability to ones outside of Metro Nashville? You mentioned several other counties. Is it open to anyone?
It's open to anyone. What we have in our policy that typically stops people short is going back to that truancy and the pacing. If your child gets behind pace, you're going to have to drive them to Nashville, and they're going to have to sit at the Cone building, and they're going to have to be taught face to face until they get back on pace. So I had a parent from Memphis that wanted to come. She was desperate to come. She said, you know, if my kid gets behind Hayes, I can't afford to drive him there. I said, well, I mean, that's our policy. So because we have that policy, it tends to be just the surrounding counties, but we do have a couple from Obion County, and they're just making sure their kids stay home. But, I mean, most parents appreciate that policy, because most parents don't want their kids to fall behind in something that they feel is a solution for them.
Okay, other questions for Ray? Any other questions? Comments? Okay, good job, we appreciate you sharing. I think one thing that's important is that with all these virtual schools, particularly how we're defining virtual schools here, that we do the appropriate value-added testing and so forth, and to make sure that we're getting the kind of results that we hope at virtual schools.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, Chuck Hagel here. There he is. Chuck, you're up. Probationary license.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen of the board, I'm Chuck Cagle. I'm with Lewis, King Creek, and Waldrop in Nashville, Tennessee. I am a member of the Tennessee Council of School Board Attorneys, and I'm inflicted with being a member of the Double L Club. I'm both a lawyer and a lobbyist, so I lobby on behalf of the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents and some other agencies as well. What I'm going to speak to today is a conversation that I broached with Dr. Nixon, and he and I have spoken about this on a number of occasions. It's about teacher licensure. In 1982, with the Education Reform Act, if any of you go back that far, I was back there then, I remember it well. We created a series of teacher licenses, a progressive set of teacher licenses that included a probationary license, an apprentice license, and then a full teacher licensure. And as teachers then came into the system, at that point they started probationary and moved forward. The movement from one license to another required the recommendation of the principal to the Office of Teacher Licensure. So there has to be there's some extra paperwork that's involved. Sooner or later we've done away with one of those licenses, but now we still have an apprentice license and a professional license there. In 1987, this board was given the complete jurisdiction over all teacher licensure. And I remember that because I was the lawyer for this board at that time and wrote the act at the behest of the board giving you complete jurisdiction over all the issuance of all teacher licenses. Since that time, the teacher license. I'm sorry. I remember Fielding too. I used to pick him up at the airport. So it's, okay. I remember, since that time, it's barely changed. It's just barely changed. The board has added a lot of licenses in there, interim credentials for folks who wish to enter the profession, and those folks have not gone through the traditional licensing route. So that's what has changed. Other than that, the licensing regulations remain the same. We're in a different day. We haven't looked at any of these provisions now for a good number of years, and we're in a different day. And it's called upon particularly the Council of School Attorneys, to sit down with other interested groups and take a look at what we're doing. And anytime we do that, we have to involve the State Board of Education. Dr. Nixon and I and the Tennessee Education Association, the representatives of TEA, PET, the Tennessee School Boards Association, sat down at lunch a while back and looked over several problems that we're now having. I'm going to spend some time talking about this. I mean no disrespect to any group of people. Please understand, we have to talk about these issues as a matter of fact. We do have teachers who get into professional problems in classrooms. And generally, our remedies for those folks who get into personal trouble, either with law enforcement, or they've misbehaved some way on campus, or they're facing termination for one reason or another before their local board of education, generally our options are limited. When we, as school superintendents, the Organization of School Superintendents is required by administrative regulation to report to the State Board of Education anytime somebody has either been terminated or they're facing termination. We have to make an interim report. Lance Rugard and his staff does a wonderful job of trying to keep up with that stuff. But then certainly, anytime they've been terminated, even if there's an infraction, an allegation of cheating on tests, the TCAP test or any test like that, we must report that to Dr. Nixon. What we found is his scope of alternatives treating that teacher and the license is very limited. The essentially this board has authorized the letters of reprimand. I'm not going to call it the right name, but there's a letter of reprimand and it goes from there to revocation. So there's really nothing in the middle of that. And we sometimes don't know how to deal with that teacher. The legislature this past year gave us a bill, and I think that Summerford and others were, either we were opposed to it, the TEA was opposed to it, but it authorizes the revocation, it authorizes the board to draft a set of regulations for and including the revocation of a teacher license if that teacher goes into default on the student loan. Now, I think you'll have to agree with me that the law requires, in order for that teacher to teach, they have to have a license. If they don't have a license, they can't teach. If they're not teaching, they're not earning income in order to pay the default on the student loan. So we've now got this problem that's just developed over a number of years with a very limited set of options. Look, and as the Council of School Attorneys, when we face disciplinary actions for teachers, we often seek to sit down and talk with the teacher and their representatives, their leads, and sometimes their lawyers, and see if there's a way that we don't have to go to a hearing on this. And oftentimes that results in a teacher resigning from office, and the school. But however, the school superintendent still has to report that as a resignation in lieu of termination to Mr. Rugard and his staff. So he gets notices from folks from school superintendents that we have cut off the disciplinary sanction at resignation, but still that person was going to be sanctioned for professional misbehavior. Well, that's where we are. What do we do in those cases? One of the things that came to mind was that we actually take a look at reclassifying licenses, and as late as this morning in Robertson County, I spoke to the superintendent and the administrative staff up there. And our recommendation, first of all, this is not set in stone. It's certainly a conversation we'd like to begin with you. Our recommendation is that once a teacher graduates from a approved teacher training institution, that teacher is issued a professional license. Now, however we want to go about evaluating that new teacher should be set forth by the department and by the State Board of Education. So if they're a new teacher in the first 2 or 3 years, the department and the State Board determines how many times they're evaluated. But once they graduate from an approved teacher training program, they're issued a professional license right out of the chutes. The second is that we revitalize what was known as the probationary license. And we use that as in times where we have to have a disciplinary tool to use, and then I'll just bring up the example. A teacher gets into default on a student loan. If we suspend their license or revoke their license, they don't have a means to make money to pay that loan. So we issue them a probationary license, which has a definite, according to the procedures and due process, would have a definite life to it. So Dr. Nixon and his staff would say, you have a probationary license that's good for a year. Within a year, you're expected to cure this problem. And that will take care of a whole host of other things. Teacher resignations because of getting into trouble with law enforcement. It's unfortunate but true, and that we deal with a number of teachers who get DUIs, and sometimes schools want to terminate those teachers. Is it possible for us to put that person into a rehab program while they continue teaching? The answer is yes. We mean the probationary license as a tool. And for that, Mr. Chairman, the Council of School Attorneys would like to recommend that we undertake the conversation to look at teacher licensure, along with the Department of Education and its requirements for evaluation, but that we, number one, recommend that entering credential for the field is the professional license, with the option of using the probationary license for other purposes, including teacher discipline. And that's our proposition.
Okay. Questions? Mike?
Did you go to an accredited law school?
I did not. I went to the National School of Law. It's not accredited by the American Bar Association.
Well, when you graduated, were you licensed to practice law?
I'm licensed to practice law in all the trial courts in front of the United States Supreme Court.
Not my question.
That's right.
When you graduated,
I did. I got a full license.
you didn't have to pass the bar.
I did pass it.
Right. So there was a step in between graduation and being admitted to the bar. You had to pass a competency test.
Yes.
And are you suggesting that teachers would not, upon graduating from a accredited school or a non-accredited school not have to pass a competency test prior to getting a license?
No, they have to pass the competency test. In this state, we've chosen the practice exam and all of its subtests, all of its professional subtests, in order to get the examination, in order to get the license. We're not in any way recommending that you do away with practice exam or whatever exam will be offered and the subtests that are involved therewith. Certainly not. But what we're saying is once the teacher graduates from an approved teacher training institute in Tennessee and they pass that exam, that they would then progress directly to full license.
So what you're saying is that we would eliminate the apprentice license?
Yes. Yes.
Right, and it also seems like that what you're recommending for the probationary license also is similar to what we've got in place right now for the formal reprimand.
Yes, that's correct.
Those kinds of things that we would have a formal reprimand on may end up reverting back to a probationary license.
That's
It's
correct.
really two things. You get rid of the apprentice license and is my understanding right?
Also, in conjunction with that, Mr. Chairman, in 20 plus years of representing school boards from one end of the state to the other, I've had more than one instance, and they're very unfortunate. We have a former principal sitting here with us of instance. This never occurred in her building, but we've had instances where teachers have been recommended for continuing employment. But something happens between the time that they're recommended for continuing employment, which used to be on or about April 15, and then the principal doesn't recommend that person to go then to professional licensure. So we have a person caught in no man's land who, in some cases, may have a job but no license. And we still then have to go and dismiss that person under the provisions of Cotton versus Reynolds, a district court case out of Chattanooga. We have to go through a dismissal proceeding. And it's quite a short hearing. You don't have a teacher license, do you? No, thank you. But it's, again, we found literally every problem with this that we could find, and we think it's now time to revisit this whole issue of beginning credentials.
Okay.
I would add that I know Sarah Habern is going to talk a little bit about some licensure issues, but we have been undertaking a process in the department that I think we talked to the state board about at the last meeting and intend to, by April, come forward with proposal for revamping teacher licensure protocol. I don't know whether that process will lead to a recommendation of eliminating the apprentice license or whether it would look like something different. But Sarah will get into this, but we have engaged a number of groups to help us think this through and are trying to think very carefully about how to ensure that licensure is aligned with the teacher quality goals that we all have as a state. So that neither argues for nor against your proposal, but merely to say we have a lot of people engaged in this process right now in an effort to bring forward a proposal to the state board by April of this year.
And we can begin, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, we can begin at least the discussions about a probationary license with very little interruption to that process because we now don't issue a probationary license. So we can just add that one to it. And Commissioner, I'd be happy to sit down with you and representatives of the groups we met with Dr. Nixon and go over our reasons to do that.
Yeah, that would be great, and I'm certainly in favor of whatever we can do to provide appropriate interim remedies so that we're not faced with the situation that the state board has tried to address previously with teachers unable to teach for less major infractions.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll now move to a major issue. Our interest here on teacher evaluation, and Commissioner, we'll turn that over to you.
Right. All right, Stephen, are you you controlling the power here? All right, perfect. So before we get into the evaluation recommendations, I wanted to reground ourselves in our strategic plan, which mirrors your strategic plan, and then also talk a little bit about the results from this year on our TCAP tests, which many of you I think have already seen. You want to flash to our strategic priorities. So just to remind everybody of the 4 strategic priorities that the department is organizing its work around, and which the state board has in various shapes or forms incorporated into its strategic plan as well. Expanding students' access to effective teachers and leaders, and that means both ensuring that we have as many effective teachers and leaders as possible, and also ensuring that our most effective teachers and leaders over the course of their careers will reach more students. Expanding families' access to good schools, which includes a whole host of areas, expanding the STEM academies, which we have been doing through Race to the Top, expanding access to high-quality charter schools, and perhaps most significantly, taking on the lowest performing schools in the state for the Achievement School District. Expanding educators' access to resources and best practices, trying to ensure that professional development becomes better and stronger, and expanding public access to information and data. So those are the 4 priorities that we ground our work in. And I think we really have organized our department around this work. The first one is the piece that draws the most attention, in part because of evaluation, because evaluation was such a hot-button issue. But the reality is we spend equal amounts of time on all of these different areas and view them all as critically important. So I'm pleased to tell you what you already know, which is that our results this past year were quite good across the state. And we earlier today have released the district-by-district results for TCAP as well, which you will be able to see how your own home districts have done. I won't go into too much depth on this other than to say we went up on 23 of 24 tests in grades 3 through 8, and the 24th we were flat on, so it was the same score. On grades 3 through 8, we had very strong growth in math and in science. In reading, we had pretty good growth in early grades reading, and then relatively flat growth in middle grades reading. So if there's an area in there that I think we would identify as a place to focus energy for professional development, it's reading in grades 5 through 9. That's the area that saw the sort of most flat performance over the course of the last year. We also had really strong growth in high school math and high school science. Algebra 1 went up significantly. Algebra 2 went up, and I'm actually particularly proud about the Algebra 2 results because under the new higher standards in Tennessee, 10,000 more students took Algebra 2 this year than took Algebra 2 last year, and the results still went up. And I think that's fantastic because that's 10,000 students who wouldn't have taken Algebra 2, wouldn't have had access to that course several years ago before this board and others acted to make that possible. So that's very good news as well. And our hope is that we'll start to see that bubble move through the system over time. The students who are now doing better in 6th, 7th, 8th grade math and in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 will start to move through the system in high school. High school results in particular, ACT results, are always a lagging indicator. So I expect that it will take a little bit of time to move the needle on that. But I think some of the steps that have been taken over the last few years in Tennessee are the right steps that will increase college readiness. We, do you want to go to the timeline of additional results? So we've released simply the TCAP results so far, where we have said across the state and now district by district what percentage of students were below basic, proficient, and advanced on TCAP. We are on Monday going to release district accountability results under the waiver. And so under our new accountability system, which replaces AYP, instead of measuring each school across the state, we measure districts. And most districts will fall in an intermediate category where they will not have any accountability tagged to them. Some districts will be exemplary in their results, which means that they not only exceeded their goals on achievement, but they also closed gaps between groups of students, which is very, very hard to do, especially when we are growing so fast in overall achievement. To have that kind of growth while simultaneously closing gaps is very difficult work, and some of our districts in the state were able to accomplish that. Then we'll have districts that are in need of improvement because they both failed to hit their achievement goals and failed to hit their gap closure goals. And then we'll also have a list of districts that are in need of subgroup improvement, which means that in one particular subgroup of students, the students moved backwards, did not advance. And some of those districts had strong overall performance, so it's important to keep that in context. But they need to focus this coming year on a group of students that didn't advance in the way that we would all like to see. So that is coming out on Monday. Then the one thing that we do under our accountability system with schools now is we will have a list of priority schools, focus schools, and reward schools. We are a few weeks away from releasing those schools. And if you'll recall, priority schools are the schools that are in the bottom 5% of the state in results, and those schools are ASD eligible. Reward schools are the top 5% in performance or the top 5% in growth. And then focus schools are the 10% of schools that have the largest gaps between groups of students. And so the focus schools will be a diverse group of schools. Some of them will actually be relatively high-performing schools, but ones that have big gaps between groups of students that they need to focus on closing. So that's the update on data and accountability releases, and maybe I'll pause there in case people have questions about the results of the upcoming accountability releases.
Questions?
System breakdown, did we get a copy of that?
For the accountability results, you mean? I can give that out to you. We're not releasing it publicly until Monday, but I can get you a copy.
I do, I don't want to
So Commissioner, you said the district information is being released today?
The district, just the results in terms of percentage of kids that are proficient, advanced, basic, and below basic on all the tests.
And then the priority schools, that we're a couple weeks out from that?
Yeah, a couple weeks out from that. Yeah.
It's good news, though.
Yeah, and honestly, you'll see from the district results that there was a high level of consistency. I mean, really, most districts exceeded their goals in achievement and grew their results. And there's always variability, and some districts grew more than other districts in particular areas, but a very high level of consistency across the state in growth. The trajectory was up for virtually everybody, which is really exciting.
And these are with harder assessments.
Well, it's under the new standard, the same standards that they had last year. Yeah, they didn't change from last year to this year, but they're harder assessments, and I think they show what the theory was 3 years ago, which is if you raise the bar, you'll encounter some initial pain, but then people will start rising to the higher levels. Before I go into our recommendations on teacher evaluation, I wanted to show some of the data on the TVOS scores compared to the observation scores. So some of you have probably read our report and know that this is a big area of focus in our report. But I wanted to call your attention to this because SCORE, of course, did great work in preparing its report on teacher evaluation. Subsequent to the SCORE report, we got this data, which then was a really critical additional piece of information for us. So the top line are the school-wide value-added scores. And then the middle line are for the teachers who have an individual value-added score, where they fell out by category. And the bottom group are the observation scores, so what the evaluators rated the teachers in terms of their observation. A few things to call out. One is, I think it's very good news for the state that the majority of teachers are 4s and 5s on individual teacher effect scores. A 4 or 5 is hard to attain. I mean, this is objectively improving students more than would be expected in the course of a year. A 3 is solid when it comes to value-added score. A 4 and a 5 are exceptional. And this is over a 3-year period of time where possible. So any teacher who has 3 years of data, we use 3 years of data to get these scores. So one very good piece of news is that the majority of teachers in the state are not just meeting expectations, but exceeding expectations against a pretty high bar, which is fantastic news. The other good piece of news, I would say, is that while the range of distribution for observations is not what we would want, it's actually better than what we've had in the past. So there at least is some range of distribution, and an effort on the part of evaluators, I think, to not simply give out the same score to everybody. Now, here is what I find the troubling piece of this. About 1 in 6 teachers who have an individual teacher effect score, about 1 in 6 teachers really struggle. And a 1 on value-added scores means that over a 3-year period of time where we have 3 years worth of data, they advance their students significantly less than we would expect in the course of a year. And one of the big challenges we saw for teachers who were a 1 in their individual value-added score, the average observation score for those teachers was 3.6. So for your typical teacher who objectively on the data is struggling to advance students, typically what happened is that their principal went in and said, "You're exceeding expectations." And the problem is, if your principal tells you you're exceeding expectations, then you are not going to get professional development to change your practice. And if you don't change your practice, you're likely to use the same practice the next year, and you're likely to get the same results the next year. So when we think about some of the things that we really want to try to adjust with the evaluation system, this is one of the very top ones for me. I think it is not fair to teachers who are struggling with performance to not give them the opportunity to improve, to not give them feedback and access to professional development to improve. And it's certainly not fair to the parents and the students who are going to be assigned to that teacher the next year. So I think this is a really important thing that we're very focused on, and we're focused on the question of how can we help principals and evaluators do a better job of having hard conversations and giving people feedback that will help them get better.
Question, how is professional development tied with that? So if they got a 3 on observation and a 1, how is it tied to they get the professional development? What's the cutoff or?
Well, there's no cutoff. So it's school and district-based professional development, and I would say that the level of professional development that has been given has been pretty variable. You know, some schools and districts have done a really good job of giving teachers tailored feedback and professional development, and some schools and districts really haven't done a very good job. Everybody gets professional development. It should be differentiated, though, based on where people are strong and where people are weak, and everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and the extent to which schools and districts have done that is pretty variable.
Is it PARC that is the framework for principal evaluation?
No.
What is it?
TILS?
Yeah. Are we evaluating principals on how well they do their evaluation?
Yes. 15% of their evaluation scores based on fidelity of implementation of the teacher evaluation.
So with these seeming misalignments, would impact their evaluation.
Yeah, though I think we need to provide at the state level much better professional development for district administrators so that they know how to have those management conversations with principals. Because I think some district leaders are having good management conversations with their principals about the alignment, and some really aren't. So that's an area of focus for us.
Hey, we had a chance to look at the difference in the teacher effect data and the observation score on a district or still across the whole state, and whether my guess would be that some districts have better alignment than other districts.
Right. Well, so we have, yes and no. We haven't done a thorough examination. We did an examination of the misalignment, but I haven't seen a district-by-district breakdown of their percentages on observations. And there is, as you would expect, there are some districts that are doing a much better job than others. And so to give an example, one of our recommendations, which I'll come to in a minute, is to better define what a gap between observation and teacher effect should be. You know, we've said the state board passed a previous rule that said that they should be aligned, but we didn't define that. So when we looked at districts based on what percentage of their teachers had observation scores that were 2 or more categories away from their teacher effect scores. So, you know, I think you would be fine if there were a teacher who was a 4 on teacher effect score and their principal gave them a 5. You would say, that's pretty close. But I think you would feel less good if there was a teacher who was a 1 and you gave them a 4. So when we ran this district by district, there was actually a fair amount of variability. And some districts were way off. And so it's the right question to ask. And the key is districts' range of distribution should be different on the observation scores because their performance is different. You know, so districts that had a great year where most of their teachers made great gains, you would expect to see their observation scores higher. So you can't necessarily just look at that. That's why you have to look at the difference between them. And some did a better job than others. The other thing I'd add is when we looked mid-year just at the observation scores, we didn't have value-added scores then, when we looked district by district and dug in districts that were the farthest off the mark, it didn't necessarily mean that the district was completely off the mark. In many cases, there would be 1 or 2 outlier schools in a district that had, 6 or 7 or 8 schools. So in many cases, it comes down to individual school management and the district leaders doing a better job with those principals. Any other on this before we move forward?
Okay.
This looks at the distribution of scores across models. So as you know, TEAM is the state model. Tiger is the model that's used by a number of the municipal school systems. COACH is Hamilton County's model, and TEM is the Memphis City school model. Now, one of the things that the state board passed back in the winter was a rule that said that if a district is misaligned in terms of the observation and the results, that the state board, no, it's the department, right, has the authority to take away that district's ability to use an alternative model. And while we are not recommending that we do that right now on the basis of year one, I would call your attention to COACH and to the observation scores under COACH. In COACH in Hamilton County, 96% of the teachers received 4s and 5s on their observation scores. 0% of the teachers received a 1 in Hamilton County on their observation scores. And if you look at the value-added scores, or if you look at just the achievement scores, you will see a fairly significant misalignment between the observation results and the other scores. And this is highly problematic. Now, I think COACH has a lot of merits as a system that gives feedback to teachers and that is built on the concept of multiple shorter observations. I think it has a lot of important things going for it. But if Hamilton County is not able to implement this with greater fidelity, we simply can't have one school district in the state that is completely misaligned from every other school district in the state in terms of their evaluation results. And that's where we stand after 1 year. So I do think it's important to call attention to that and to note that the department intends to communicate to Hamilton County that we need to get those more in alignment, or we're not going to be able to continue to support the implementation of that model. I don't know if people have any questions on that.
You think it's the model or the execution?
Well, I mean, it's both. Here's the difference on COACH compared to the other models. So in COACH, you don't get a score till the end. So in TEAM, in the state model, you teach, you get observed, you go to your post-observation conference, and you get a score on the lesson that you taught. In COACH, it all happens at the very end. So, you know, in TEAM, people are putting a stake in the ground along the way. And the problem with COACH is you get to the end of the year and people only have one stake to put in the ground. And I think when it came time to put that stake, people clearly didn't feel comfortable giving anything other than a 4 or a 5. So it's the model in the sense that there are no scores along the way, but it's the implementation. I mean, that model could still work, you know?
Now, do these have the value-add scores that you're getting ready to release?
This is value-added scores. What we released today were just the TCAP results, so just the percentage of kids that are proficient or advanced on
Value-add
different
went out
tests.
last week.
Value-added scores we have not released either statewide or by, well, I guess we have released some statewide because they're in this report, but we haven't released those by district.
But they're in here.
This is just for these categories of evaluation models. We don't have district by district breakout.
All they have so far is the quick scores, right?
No, they've got value-added scores. Districts have value-added scores.
When did they get them?
They got those on June 15th.
So Commissioner, what are the next steps to really narrow the gap and deal with the misalignment between the TVOS scores and then the observations?
Yeah. Well, there are a few things that we have in our recommendations, which I will get into, which I think will help get us down that path. But it's something I think we're going to have to keep visiting every year to see if we can make progress on this. It's really important to make progress on this. But maybe we should just go into the recommendations and start talking about some of the recommendations. So some of the recommendations that we made in our report are things that can be implemented immediately by the Department of Education. Some are things that the General Assembly will need to take up in its session, though those are all things that can still go into effect for this school year because they relate to data. And then some are items that we're bringing before the state board for you all to consider. So the first, the state should ensure that additional teachers have access to individual value-added growth measures. This is something we've talked about along the way. Less than 40% of the teachers in the state this past year got an individual value-added score. Most teachers in the state received a school-wide value-added score. And one of the things we've talked about since planning, and Mike no doubt remembers this from the TEAC committee, is trying to figure out how to get more teachers into the individual bucket. We are bringing before you some measures that we intend to use. Under the law, we could just implement these ourselves, but we think that it's actually important that the state board know and recognize and have buy into some of the things that we're doing. So, third grade, for third grade teachers, about 100 of our 136 school districts last year administered a second grade test. They administered the SAT-10 for second grade. And in those districts, third grade teachers can get a value-added score using the TCAP score next year. And we are recommending that we do that. And in first and second grade, we are going to offer to districts to implement pre and post tests for SAT-10 this coming year. And the state would pay for the assessment, but it would be district decision whether they wanted to actually use the assessment. Our belief is that the vast majority of districts will use it, just as the majority of districts implemented the SAT-10 test. But that would allow first, second, and third grade teachers to all have value-added scores during the coming year.
How many teachers does that represent?
It's something like 6% of the total teaching force per grade or something like that. So it's actually a pretty significant increase. Yeah, it's a pretty significant increase. The one of our principles is we don't want to put forward measures just for the purpose of evaluating teachers. We only want to put forward measures if we think it's actually going to improve instruction. And I think we also feel very strongly that it is important to have more data on how our first and second grade students are doing. It's not accidental that our third grade reading language arts scores have been historically low in the state. Something is happening before third grade, and so we think it's really important to start having data. We are also going to put out an RFP to develop a state test for first and second grade, but that will take a couple of years to develop. Then the third area for teachers to get an individual growth measure is the fine arts. And in fine arts, a group of fine arts teachers have been meeting over the course of this year to develop a model for using portfolios of work that are submitted for blind evaluation by peers. It's really exciting. It's innovative work. It's something the Secretary of Education has cited a couple of times, actually. And again, this would be something where we would make this available to districts to use so that their fine arts teachers could submit portfolios of work in accordance with these standards, and those teachers would then be able to have an individual value-added score. So I think it's exciting, it's innovative. It would be the first time that something like this has happened. And I'm calling it a value-added score. That's the wrong term. It's an individual growth score that would be sufficiently similar to how we do value-added in tested subjects. And in addition, we're also going to have, in a couple of areas, some changes to school-wide growth measures. So for CTE teachers, they would continue to have school-wide growth, but it would just be for CTE concentrators in math and literacy. And then for ELL students, it would be school-wide growth based on ELDA, the ELDA test. So it's a way to narrow the scope of what is being assessed in the school-wide measure, but it's still a school-wide measure, so it's still relatively imperfect. So that's the first one. This is an ongoing project. Our goal is over time to get more and more teachers into the individual teacher effect score category. We are never going to get all the way there. I think it would be inappropriate to try to have an individual growth metric for every conceivable kind of teacher. But we think that over the next 2 or 3 years, we can get from where we are to in excess of 3/4 of our teachers.
Boy, that was a big conundrum when we were going through that. That you just fixed it.
Well,
It was a huge conundrum.
it's a little early to declare victory, but we think it's appropriate, and we think we're making good steps. And every single state that's dealing with evaluation right now has the same challenge, and people are approaching it different ways. And some places really are trying to create assessments for every single thing. And I think we're trying to strike the right balance.
Where are we with foreign language?
We've had a very hard time with world languages in high school getting a measure that works. We actually had a group of teachers over the course of the year working on it, and what we came up with simply didn't work, and I can't remember why. Anish, do you remember?
Yeah, there's something called a stamped assessment, but the way the assessment is scored doesn't make itself available to create a value-added measure. So we're looking into next year to see if we can get the scale scores created through that.
That's right. They don't give you scale scores, right?
Maybe like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right. So you couldn't create value added off of it. It's an absolute achievement measure. All right. So moving on, the next couple are General Assembly recommendations that I think are important. The first is currently students with disabilities under the law are not allowed to be part of value-added scores. We recommend that this prohibition be removed for a bunch of reasons. I mean, one, 10% of the teachers in the state are special education teachers, and they can't get an individual score. But two, and more importantly, we are really trying to narrow the gap between students with disabilities and their peers, and to continue to say that students with disabilities don't count for value-added scores sends exactly the wrong message. And three, when you actually look at the data, students with disabilities do not harm value-added scores. That's a misconception. So we're going to take that in front of the General Assembly, and we think we'll have broad support for that. The next one, this is a very big one. While we try to get more teachers into individual teacher effects categories, the teachers that remain in the school-wide value-added category, we are recommending that the Assembly reduce the percentage of reliance on school-wide value-added. So right now it's 35% of their evaluation score. We heard loud and clear from teachers across the state over the course of the year that they did not feel that that was fair or appropriate. We also heard again and again that having a school-wide value-added score was contributing to school culture and was contributing to teachers working together. So we think it should remain as part of the evaluation, but we agree with reducing it from 35% to a lower threshold. And we didn't state a percentage in our report. The governor's office would work together with legislative leadership to try to craft a proposal around that before the legislative session.
Good.
I assume people will just stop me if they have questions. Okay. Right now, during this past year, teachers with school-wide value-added scores, similar to teachers with individual teacher effect scores, we used a 3-year score rather than a 1-year score. With individual teachers, it's better to use a 3-year score because it smooths out some of the volatility in the data. With a school-wide score, there's less volatility because you have more scores that go into it. But we also don't want to create inadvertently the situation where teachers feel like, well, I can look at the school's data from the last 2 years and have a pretty good idea of what the 3-year score is going to be, and that therefore is going to influence my decision on where to teach. You know, we want great teachers going to all kinds of schools, and for schools that are in turnaround situations, we think they should be rewarded for having a really great year where they grow a lot. So this is one that we can do on our own. Number 5, teachers with individual value-added scores who receive a 4 or a 5 on the TVAS, on the value-added score, should be allowed to use that score to count for 100% of their total evaluation score. A couple things on this. We heard over the course of the year various anecdotes that probably ring true to all of us of teachers that use unorthodox styles but get really good results. So they maybe don't fit into a typical rubric for instruction, but they get great results. And what we care about are the results. The other piece is because they would get their score at the end of the year, that wouldn't stop them from getting feedback along the way. So they would still get feedback against the rubric along the way. If their principal said that they were a 2 or a 3 because they didn't exactly fit in the box, but then their kids delivered a 5 in terms of the results, then we think, great, they should be able to count that as their evaluation score. And I haven't heard any pushback on that recommendation so far. Number 6. This is a state board item. So we would say that the 15% option, which you all will recall, there's 35% that's value-added scores and an additional 15% where the state board approves a list of things that teachers and principals then can select jointly as their achievement measure. We would say that that did not go very well this year. For a variety of reasons. We got into that a little bit in the grievance process, and so some of the 15% measures come back very late in the year, which is a big challenge for evaluation scores. And additionally, we saw evidence that teachers and principals often were approaching it not from the perspective of what's the best indicator of my impact on achievement, but instead, what's the best way to get a high score? So we are bringing in front of the state board the recommendation to delete some of the current options. So, and just to articulate those, one is the CTE concentrator graduation rate. One is post-secondary matriculation, persistence, and placement. One is participation in advanced coursework. One is 9th grade promotion and retention rate. And those are all 15% options that come back very late and delay receipt of evaluation results into the following year. We also need to continue to work with districts to help them execute the selection process in a better way. And I think this is something that we should monitor and watch over the course of this year. If we're sitting here next year and the 15% piece of the evaluation system has gone poorly again, and we don't feel like it's contributing to making teachers more effective, then I think we should consider whether it belongs in the evaluation system at all. But in the interim, we think we should at least remove the measures that are holding up the full evaluation results.
Mike, you all right then? These are all items that you suggested, right? I'm kidding.
Changes to the qualitative rubric, I can be relatively quick on this. We already did training on evaluators this summer. So there was both retraining of all existing evaluators and new training for new evaluators. We're making a real effort to ensure that the rubric is not treated as a checklist. So this is a big item that we're trying to be focused on to make people use it in a more holistic way. We are going to do a data analysis over the course of this year to streamline the rubric. I know this is an item, Fielding, that's near and dear to your heart, the question of how you tailor the rubric a little bit more. And so we heard over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, please don't change the rubric very much for next year. We're just getting used to it. We just understand it. Let's go forward with it for another year. And so our decision was to take a close examination over the course this year. I'm pretty sure when we look at the data, we will find redundancies and we'll be able to tailor it a little bit. But we decided not to do too much on the instructional piece of the rubric for this year other than to train people better on how to use it. And then we're trying to also make sure that there are additional examples of performance levels for teachers available. So we will continue over the course this year to build the video library sample lessons and through our field service centers build better observation protocols for teachers observing each other.
Okay.
Professionalism component was one that we did significantly reduce. There were 10 indicators of professionalism. We've reduced that to 4. And I think the 10 were just clearly redundant when you looked at the scores. And we are also getting more school districts to pick up the work that TEM has started in Memphis with student surveys. And so we have a number of districts. Anish, do you know how many? 35 districts that will either use or pilot student surveys. I think in most cases they're piloting.
Most cases they'll use it in some.
Okay, most are using and some will pilot, and under state board rules they're allowed to use that for 5% of the evaluation score. And all the work that the Gates Foundation has done studying this has been really impressive work. So we're excited about seeing what more districts do with this piece. Process efficiency. So this starts to get into what Teresa was asking about earlier. How are we going to take on some of the work of getting feedback to the right people? We heard all year from principals consistently from the start of the year, I don't like the one-size-fits-all model, and I want to spend less time with my 5s and more time with my 1s. Heard that all year. Now the problem was then principals didn't identify any 1s. So it was sort of, empty words in terms of how the scoring worked on the observation. We agree with this, though, in principle. And so what we are recommending to the state board is that teachers who either get a 5 on their overall evaluation score or on their individual TVOS score should have a more streamlined process. So they'd have a full-length observation and then 2 additional short unscheduled visits with limited paperwork. And given that 39% of the teachers were 5s on their individual TVOS, I think this will be a pretty big time saving for principals and give them more flexibility. I think it's the sort of paperwork piece that sometimes can be really challenging. Now the flip side to that is we are recommending that teachers who are a 1 on either their overall evaluation score or their individual TVOS score should have additional unannounced full-length observations. Essentially what our proposal does, and I think we get into this in a couple of slides, but essentially what this proposal says is that if a teacher is a 1 on either their overall evaluation score or on the individual TVOS score, that they would be observed in the same manner as a novice teacher is currently observed. Right now, novice teachers have more observations, and the theory is that novice teachers need more feedback. They need more feedback in order to improve their practice. I think we would probably all agree that you could say the same thing about a teacher who is performing at a 1 level. They need more feedback. And this is a way to get more feedback to teachers. It's also a way to ensure that principals have the conversations with their teachers that they need to have and that too many times last year did not have. So I think this is a really important part of what will help us improve on the misalignment. Any questions on that piece?
Okay.
We're also continuing to take on some of the technology and some of the paperwork and some of the other process pieces to try to continue to streamline efficiencies. We hear loud and clear that principals want to spend their time observing or talking to teachers. They do not want to spend their time transcribing onto additional forms, and so we're trying to make some changes that make that better. Another state board recommendation here. So the state board, with the assistance of the department, should more clearly define its policy on monitoring the districts that are the farthest off, that have the greatest variance between value-added and observation scores. We also are recommending that evaluators who are struggling the most, the evaluators that are farthest off in their assessments, should have to go back to recertification classes. They should have to go back and go through the full 3 or 4 day training. And if you look at the next, this is what we had talked about before. We think that we should look at the gap between observations and value-added scores, and we think that the 10% of schools that have the highest percentage of teachers falling outside the acceptable range should get additional training and support. So the bottom 10% of schools, in terms of their ability to implement this, the state will send in trainers to do additional training in the school. Districts with 20% or more of their teachers that fall outside the acceptable range, and this year there were a handful of those districts where 20% or more of their teachers were outside the acceptable range. Those districts should lose their ability to apply for or implement alternate models and to have team flexibility, because remember, we also have 40 districts that ask for flexibility to adapt the team model themselves. So it's another way for us to measure and ensure that districts stay in the acceptable range of distribution. And as I noted earlier, we intend to put Hamilton County on notice that their results this year fell outside the acceptable range, and that we expect those results to fall within the acceptable range next year.
Let's put them on the speakerphone. They were sitting here.
And then the last piece is simply our ongoing effort as we've revamped our field service centers. We have 8 centers across the state. We've revamped them. We have hired new staff into these centers, and we are going to do significantly more to help district and school leaders with professional development. Professional development is always going to be, by and large, driven by districts and by schools, but we think the state can do a much better job of providing technical assistance about what kinds of professional development are effective. Those are our recommendations.
Okay, questions? Comments?
Not to be, you dealt with stuff that he wrestled with, and it's incredibly good work. You have no idea. I mean, we're sitting there making, couldn't mess with it. This is great.
Well, I've said all along that I think that the work TEAC did to get ready for this and the courage the TEAC showed in being willing to move forward into implementation when other states were not was an enormous difference maker. We learned far more from implementing than we would have from continuously studying. And we're going to be in a better position this coming school year than will the many states that are going to be trying to implement for the first time.
Yeah, but you fix a lot of problems.
Yeah, I would certainly echo Mike's comments. As I've listened to teachers, administrators, read carefully the score report, so forth, I think that done a great job here of addressing the issues that are out there. And I think this is just a major step forward. I think when we approved this for last year, we recognized that we were going to need to make some changes to prove that we would learn some things that offered opportunities for improvement. I think we've done a really good job of capturing those things that will really improve the system.
Let me ask the commissioner a question. Obviously, we've worked through a lot of stuff with teachers, and I think teachers may still have a lot of concerns, but I also think it'd be accurate to say that going through the process, it didn't turn out to be as draconian as it looked going into it. And it's going to get better. But one of the Achilles heels in this is going to be able to get principals to take it as seriously as clearly the teachers are taking it. And that's going to have to happen by the people who evaluate those evaluators, including the principal. And at some point in time, and this is I always thought that I would resent being evaluated by someone who doesn't get evaluated themselves. I'm not certain that central office and everybody else shouldn't have to have a job description and metrics and have to stand for it. And that could be something that General Assembly adds if they want to at some point in time. But we're going to have to start looking at some principal reform.
I think with the principles and their implementation, I think this is hard work. When I point out the differences and I point out that the principals are not giving out any low scores, I don't do that in a sort of scornful way and say this is easy stuff. I think part of the challenge is this human challenge, not just that comes from having conversations with people who you know well and who you like, but also the human challenge that in many cases principals have been managing the same teachers for 10 years and they've never given them this feedback. And so there's an element at which suddenly giving somebody new feedback that says that they're not performing at a high enough level is admitting that what you said for the last 9 years was not true. And I think there are a bunch of just human elements to all of this that are really, really hard. And we just have to figure out how do they get the management at the district level that they need, and how do we build the sort of peer-to-peer professional development conversations that help people understand how you can overcome those hurdles. And I just think it's hard work.
Okay. Other comments or questions on teacher evaluation?
I just had a question, Commissioner, about what you were talking about back in the part about evaluating first and second graders, so we have a better idea about third grade scores. Could you go through that again just a minute?
Yeah, so right.
Can we hear that question again? I'm sorry.
I had a question about the first, second grade scores that they were going to use so we could track performance of third graders, maybe make sure they were better prepared. Is that what I understand?
Yeah. So right now,
Right.
yes, there are no standardized tests right now that are used for first and second graders, except in cases where districts have endeavored to do it on their own. And there are 30-some districts, I think, that gave standardized assessments to first grade students last year. So this past year, we paid for any district that wanted to use the Stanford assessment for second grade students, so the SAT-10 for second grade students. We paid for any district that wanted to use it. 100 out of the 136 districts did. And for all of those districts, their third grade teachers previously couldn't get a value-added score because that's the first tested year, so there's no previous year to compare to. Now they can get a value-added score because you can Yeah, you can actually crosswalk the second grade assessment against the third grade CCAP. And what we also want to do this year then is pay for and make available first grade SAT-10, and we want to make available a pre-test and a post-test for first and second grade. And SAS, which is our partner that does the value-added scores, believes, they won't know for sure until they see the results, but they say that it is likely that if we use the pre-test and the post-test, they will be able to get a value-added score next year for first and second grade teachers based on the growth during the course of the year. And even if they can't, even if it doesn't work, it will set it up for next year, and all of those teachers will get the pre-test results back, which will tell them how their kids are doing.
Then you add to that the fine arts and the CTE and your objective of getting to 75% of the teachers for a quantitative measure. So I think that's a major step forward if you get all that done.
Yeah.
Mr. Ralston, can I ask a question?
Yes.
This is on the data on page 8 on the slides. And I've seen some of this before. We talked about it a little bit the other day, but I'm curious about the observation data. Does it reflect all teachers? Does it reflect just teachers in individual TBOS?
No, reflects all teachers, I believe, right?
The one on there is teachers with individual value.
So this is just teachers with individual TBOS.
Okay, so these two are the same group?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Was it different? Do you know, did we look at all teachers? Was it pretty similar across?
Pretty similar observations.
Yes.
Okay, other questions? Okay, let me suggest we take a quick break here before we get to Sarah and the licensure standards. So we can take a 10-15 minute break. No more than 15. Let's say no more than 10, so it won't be more than 15.
We want everybody to have a lot of energy.
Right. As long as you get a little extra time.
I think we got
How is it? I can tell. You look good. You look more relaxed and healthy. As long as you're living life and loving that grandbaby. That's right. That's right. Good. You've been on my, oh, are you? Yeah. What do you now? Just a little bit further.
Ordinarily with big lunch.
They have a lawyer. My dad taught school law classes when he retired from practice because he was on the school board in real estate law, and then he started teaching education law. You should teach education law. You should. That's my class. Gosh. You totally should. It'd be fun too. I'll put you in touch with my dad. Y'all can share. So bye.
2 times I did that, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Took you this long to figure that out? Well, yeah. It teaches you to think.
I mean, it's nothing
Nothing fun, no. Yeah, well, at least you know that.
Let live and learn, right?
Yep. Now you can kind of pick your poison.
Any way you would plug her in. My daughter's she is retired. She'd almost be like a good teenager.
Okay, let's reconvene. Okay, Sarah, we're all refreshed and interested in what
Ready
you
for
got to say.
licensure?
Yeah.
All right. Give folks a minute to settle back in, but just got our slides ready. You know what you're doing? Yep. I'm good to go. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time, and we'll try to be relatively short here because I know we've had a lengthy afternoon already, but it's good to see everyone. Thank you. I was telling Chairman Ralston as well for the opportunity to talk a little bit further about licensure. As the Commissioner mentioned earlier, this is an area that we're really excited to dig into further at the department. We see it as a huge lever for changing both the pipeline of our educators as well as setting some rigorous standards that align with our practicing teachers and the expectations that we've set for folks that are already in the classroom through team and other measures that we've taken. We've talked kind of tangentially at the last couple of meetings about licensure and the plan that the department has or is putting together to make some substantive changes to the way we think about licensure standards, program approval, and kind of what we think about as the architecture of licensure, which is what Mr. Cagle was talking about in terms of the types of licenses that we issue and the bar of entry and the measures required for ongoing renewal and advancement. So I want to get into all three of those buckets in a little bit more detail, but before I do, I want to take a chance to introduce a couple new staff members on my team. As I think I've mentioned before, the Teachers and Leaders Division really is kind of the human capital work at the department. So we span preparation and program approval, licensure, the recruitment and strategic compensation work, as well as now evaluation and professional development. So it's kind of that spectrum of preparation to practice. And I've been working hard to staff up to get the right people to kind of help me in that work. And Amy Wooten is one of them, who you'll hear from here in just a minute, but she's joined us as the Executive Director of Analytics Strategy. And that's kind of a fancy way of saying data and policy, particularly, though, the licensure and program approval pieces. So you'll hear from her in just a minute, but we're excited to have Amy. We're also excited to have Paul Fleming, who's behind the Commissioner here. I think some of you may recognize him. He was at your last meeting as principal at Hume Fogg for the Blue Ribbon recognition that his school received in the spring, and he's recently joined us as the Executive Director of Leader Effectiveness. So we're not going to talk a whole lot about our leadership strategy today, but we will be coming back to you with more information about that because that's
essential to the work to get effective teachers and effective leaders into classrooms and schools, and so we're excited to have Paul on board to lead that work as well. Okay, before I hand it over to Amy, just by way of context, again, we've spent a lot of time today talking about team and our evaluation process, and we've focused at the department largely on, again, our practicing teachers and raising expectations for instructional practice and student outcomes for teachers who are sitting in the classroom, for principals who are currently in school buildings. But it's ignoring a big part of the picture if we don't look at the pipeline and the preparation aspects of kind of the human capital continuum. So I want to spend some time today, again, talking about our thoughts and get your thoughts as well as we start this work to really dig into licensure and program approval and to make some changes to those big buckets that really do affect our pipeline and our overall quality of educators. One thing that we talked about recently at your last meeting, and you'll have that on your agenda for tomorrow as well, are the praxis test scores and making sure that we're setting those at a competitive level and taking the accepted recommended score from the advisory council that sets those scores and not setting our scores lower. But truthfully, that's just a small part of the overall picture of this work. And so I want to let Amy take the chance to kind of brief you on the way we're thinking about approaching this work, the timeline that it will take to kind of get us there, so what you can expect, where the opportunities are for input, who we're partnering with. This is kind of a massive undertaking, and we want to make sure we have the right people around the table, that we're really engaging in this work in a way that is transparent and collaborative, because we do think it's really critical to the overall work that we're doing to increase the effectiveness of educators across the state. Amy's got a couple slides that I think she's going to share with you, but I'm going to hand it over to her.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, I am relatively new. I've been in Tennessee for 8 weeks, and so this has been a really steep learning curve, but it's been really exciting work to get started with. So real quickly, I'm going to walk us through the conceptual framework. You got our concept paper in front of you, and this lays out what we are looking forward to doing. As Sarah mentioned, this is going to be quite an initiative and an undertaking for us, and that there are several key components, and we're going to briefly talk about all three of those today, but specifically focus on our revision of licensure standards, and focus on that today in part because it's really going to kick off next week on Thursday. We have our first big meeting related to this, and so we want to make sure we share with you exactly where we are on this, and then we'll have some time for a discussion at the end. So first thing that our initiative is designed to do is to ensure that all Tennessee students have access to an excellent education. And what we think that we need to do now is improve those policies and procedures that are generating the pipeline of educators licensed to teach in Tennessee. So a lot of what we've talked about today has focused on our outcomes, our TCAP outcomes, and our team outcomes, our evaluation and our student achievement. But as Sarah mentioned, we know that that's only a part of the picture. And one of the things that we have to focus on is what happens to our teachers before they actually get into the classroom. And so we know that we have licensure standards. Those standards, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, but what they do is tell us what a teacher should know and be able to do when she completes her program and is awarded a license to teach in the state of Tennessee. Another primary use of those standards for us is to help guide our program approval. So when we go out and we work with our educator preparation providers, as they're going to be called now, these are the standards by which they are measured before we award them approval to train our educators. And then following that process, we at the department actually award the license. And key in that now is that we base our decision to do that on the fact that they are adequately prepared once they send those credentials to us. Once an educator preparation provider tells us that this person is in fact prepared to be in the classroom, we make our decision based on that assumption. So what we want to do now, and this came up earlier today too, is focus on how can we streamline our licensing process and make sure that our license now is a tool for us to use to make sure that we get great people into the classroom quickly, but that also if we have folks who either we need to give them an opportunity to exit the profession gracefully, or we need to help them know that this isn't the right place for them, that our license might also be a tool that we want to use in that way. So like I mentioned, the first piece of this puzzle is going to be revising our educator licensure standards. Because our program approval and our licensing structure are based on the fact that these standards are where we want them to be, this was the first place we thought we needed to start. So we have engaged in a partnership with ETS to help us in this effort. We recognized that we needed some capacity outside of the department to help us with this effort because it is such a significant and complex set of work that we need to do. So ETS is going to work with us to draft guidelines for our new standards. And those new standards are going to be aligned with a lot of the other work that we've been doing in the state around Common Core. We're going to align them with our team educator rubric. We also are going to take cues from national standards from our different disciplines, our math standards, our science standards, will guide the development of these standards. Next week, as I mentioned, on August 2nd, we're going to bring in all the folks that are going to be working on this with us for a kickoff meeting and provide them with some training to help them understand what the purpose of the process is and how we will actually go through the revision of these standards. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The review teams have been constructed or are in the process of being constructed. And we reached out to lots of different organizations in the state to help us identify great people to be on these teams. We need somewhere between 100 and 120 people to help us review licensure standards on 13 different teams that are sort of broken up by discipline. We got over 350 applications. We were absolutely thrilled. And educators all throughout the state and our higher ed faculty are really, really excited about doing this work. So we were more than pleased with the folks that asked to be a part of this, and we went through a selection process and couldn't have everybody that we wanted on all of these teams, but we do have a set of teams we've invited to join us next Thursday, and the teams are composed of teachers, practicing teachers, current district and school level administrators, and then higher ed faculty. We wanted to make sure we got representation both from schools of education and from our content and discipline areas as appropriate. And we've been really excited about the feedback on that. So what are the new standards going to look like? As I mentioned, we want to make sure that they are aligned with Common Core standards and our team rubrics. We're asking our students to learn in a different way, our teachers to teach in a different way, and they're being held to a different standard. So it's going to be important that as we prepare educators to come into the classroom, that the standards on which they're prepared help them meet those standards once they actually do come into our classrooms. So the 4 characteristics that we're focused on across the board, across all the disciplines, are that our new characteristics are clear and unambiguous, they're hierarchical, they're non-redundant, and they use appropriate terminology. Non-redundant simply means that if one standard covers it, you're not going to see it somewhere else. We want to make sure that we don't have 400 pages of standards, which is what we have right now. We want to streamline these so that they're actually useful to folks. Appropriate terminology. Certainly we should be using the vocabulary that's appropriate to the discipline. So let's take just a minute to talk about the other 2. Clear and unambiguous. The first example here is an example that might, I'm good. That might read much like what we would see in our standards right now. Teachers should understand measures of central tendency. The question is, what does that mean? How do we know it? How do we know if a teacher who's being prepared to teach math knows how to do this, and what does that look like in her classroom? Instead, we hope to replace that standard with something that is more well-defined, such as teachers can describe the fundamental differences between the 3 measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode. And a statement like this is much more concrete, and our educator preparation providers can measure this and also tell us how they measure this. Feel free to jump in with questions as I'm going along, if you have them. We'll also have hierarchical standards. These are standards that have embedded in them additional knowledge or skills that a teacher needs to have in order to demonstrate what we want her to know in the classroom. Again, this allows us to streamline our number of standards so that we don't have a lot of 45 different things a teacher's trying to know how to do, but a clear set of standards that have embedded within that all of the knowledge and skills she'll need. The review process, the first stage of the process is development. In this part of the process, we are going to work closely with ETS experts who have the capacity to actually write standards. They will also be reaching out to subject matter experts across the country. We've been incredibly impressed with their willingness to work with us so closely on this. We also will have 2 of our team leads from each of the review teams to work with them in an iterative process to develop the initial draft standards. After that, the draft standards, and I should say the department will be working closely along the way to revise draft standards as they're being built. Then once that happens, in what we're calling post-development, the entire review team will receive the set of draft standards, and they will analyze these standards and consider how well they are aligned to the other national standards that I've mentioned, our Common Core standards, our team rubrics, and then ensure that they have appropriate content and cognitive complexity. That process is going to take us probably through December, which sounds, to me, really fast. At that point, you might want to take a look at the back of your concept paper, and you'll see a timeline. And so in December of 2012, we anticipate getting the final draft standards sent to the department and hope to bring them to the board soon thereafter and get them approved in early 2013. The thing to remember is once these standards get approved, this is very much the first step in the process. The next step will be working closely with our educator preparation providers to help them think about and understand how to begin to incorporate these standards in their program. And we'll be working on our program approval process, both for our leader programs and our teacher programs, to make sure that they're incorporating these new standards. And then, if all goes well, we should see our first cohort of master's students who complete one-year master's programs who've gone through their programs under these new standards will enter the classroom in 2016.
Amy, can I just add, I'd like to just sort of say on behalf of the board how much we appreciate the work. This has in the past been fallen under the purview of the board. We've just sort of taken that on, and now because of capacity issues, we've asked the department to partner with us. And I would totally say that without the help of our friends at ETS, this would be an impossibility. They are devoting so many resources to this. It's incredible. When we get on conference calls and there are almost a dozen folks from New Jersey on the line there, and you think, wow, these people, really care about what we do, and that's really nice to know, and glad to know we have that partnership with them. And it's a massive undertaking. It's turning a battleship. It really is. And so, but we're going to do it anyway.
And like I said, our educators in the field are really excited about this work. We know our teachers are getting ready to walk back into classrooms and start doing all of that work, but we had no shortage of teachers who were ready and excited to jump into this work, even though it's going to add to their already challenging schedules.
Other questions? And I also wanted to just piggyback a little bit on what Amy has gone through, because as she mentioned and I mentioned, this is one part of kind of a three-pronged process. We do think the standards are kind of the foundation on which the other two are built. So the program approval piece and the licensure architecture, for lack of a better word, are going to be part and parcel with this work, but we want to tackle the standards and start to have the conversations and again think about what that means for how we issue licenses, what data we're using, how we make that a more output-driven process, and similarly with program approval, taking advantage of the data that we're continuing to generate that can be a reflection back to those institutions about how they are doing in terms of preparing candidates. We can use that information to inform our approval of those institutions. So those two, because they're more policy-based and less time-intensive in terms of the work that needs to be done, will happen alongside this effort, but they have to happen in conjunction or none of them will work.
So, for example, with our program approval process, we definitely want to be holding our programs accountable for measuring their candidates' progress towards these standards, but we can't ask them to do that, or it'll be better to ask them to do that once we have these standards in place, so that they know the challenge that they're facing. And this is going to be interesting for our educator program providers, and thinking about the way that they prepare their candidates, and a lot of that may change for them as well. But they're excited about this work too.
So what will we receive in April? I know you'll be coming to us in April.
Yep, so that I was just, you were reading my mind. I was going to say, so part of what Amy mentioned in terms of timeline is expedient, and part of the reason to have ETS help us with this work is to allow that kind of expedient process. Our hope is to have a first reading for you in January and a second reading in April. And again, knowing that, as David said, this is a massive ship that we're attempting to turn, that seems swift, but we think with the right capacity and the right partners and the right input from our educators that we can bring to you in January a first reading and a second reading in April. That will allow us to take steps to, again, additionally make changes to the license architecture and the program approval pieces in a way that moves us forward without taking undue time, knowing that even at that, it's going to take several years before we see the full impact on the graduates coming out of these programs. Mm-hmm.
Will any part of this work encourage our preparation programs to recruit more qualified people to actually enter their programs? I think that's, to me, an extremely critical piece of this.
Yes, and I think, I've heard the commissioner say recruit, recruit, recruit. I mean, it really is at every level, such a fundamental first step. And I think we can set admissions criteria at the state level that helps, with that. We can work with institutions as part of the program approval process to encourage them to do more active recruitment. But I completely agree. Until you're making an active effort to bring the right people into your program, you're only going to get, so
Two
far.
things that I'll add to that are that I think if the standards are rigorous standards, and programs know that we're going to also be asking them how they measure whether their candidates meet these standards, that's going to encourage them to enroll candidates that they feel confident will be able to do that. And then secondly, I think that we are working. One of the pieces we want to do with this review process is make sure we are bringing in our faculty who aren't in schools of education to continue that dialogue that we've been building on for years with those faculty to, when they're teaching chemistry, you might be teaching chemistry to someone who's going to teach that to high schoolers, and how do they think about that when they build their courses. And we definitely have recruited those folks for these review teams.
I know what Mike's going to say.
So, we're going to create, I think this is incredible. We're going to create a state that values the highest level of professionally skilled teachers. Colleges are then, because they get paid for who they graduate now, more than they get on entry level, they're going to work hard to recruit the very best people that's going to go into and move them into teaching, which will be a harder curriculum. The thing we got to do is pay them when they get out, so they don't go into some. Why am I going to go into this rigorous course and make half of what I can make over here? So we're going to have to deal with faculty funding.
I knew that's what he was going to say.
Yeah, but I'm glad he said it, because you're right, and that will be a topic, hopefully that we'll be able to get into, because, as Amy said, I didn't bring Sylvia with me, but some of you may know Sylvia Flowers, who was with SCORE. She's now with us as well, and her area of focus really is on helping districts think about recruitment, retention, and strategic compensation. We have to be actively managing talent at the district and school level, and until we do, we can prepare teachers all day, but if they're not getting the recognition and the reward at the school level, we'll continue to see them leave the profession. So Yep, thanks for that.
Great.
Other thoughts or questions? Again, we're excited to start this dialogue and know that, we will be coming back to you at every meeting between now and April to talk further, certainly the workshops, if not formal agenda items, but be happy to take any other questions.
Any other questions? Okay. Sarah, Amy, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. Important subject. Yep. Okay, we will now turn to questions that are on the agenda for tomorrow. What questions do you have that we can answer here today? Carolyn, I'm sure you've got at least 4 or 5. One thing that, and I might add here on the teacher principal evaluation policy, we got this on first reading, and we really anticipate that we'll be coming back in a conference call here in a couple of weeks. Give us opportunity to be out there and see what kind of feedback we get and so forth, but we really plan to come back with a conference call to handle this item on second reading within the next couple of weeks.
Last time we met, we took a vote on first reading regarding cut score for teacher.
Yep.
Where are we on that second reading?
Made fantastic progress. Dick Ray is going to be so excited that we go on to the multi-state recommendation instead of the one standard deviation below that.
So that one's gone by the way of the chair called. Right? I didn't know if it was
Yeah,
going to be.
that's
I didn't know
on
if
the
it was going to be
agenda.
a stopgap.
Now, the only thing that's on the agenda is the new cut scores that we're establishing. They are, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, all in line with the multi-state task force recommendations. But our intent would be, as we set new cut scores, that they will be aligned with the.
And that doesn't require 2 votes.
Well, we do.
But it was a different.
The one tomorrow, we're going to treat it as the second reading.
Okay.
But we're only really setting the ones tomorrow that we looked at the last reading, so it's only the new one.
They just amended that number, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Chairman, could we ask the staff to notify Mr. Ray after this? Like some sort of special.
Yeah. Special courier.
In the room.
Okay. Other questions?
Oh, I had a question on item 3K, the special education diploma. I understand, I believe, the intent of that legislation change and what we have to do in the rule, but I'm wondering the way the language is written, that after the 4th year of high school, a student with disabilities could receive the diploma, would that in any way impair or inhibit their ability to continue to receive services until they receive it?
No. The special ed diploma does not relieve the system of responsibility to provide services until the child reaches age 22.
Right.
It could be a moving document. There might be a changing placement or the location or something, but they could continue to stay in that high school after that.
So we wouldn't see students with disabilities kind of giving up their right to that just because they had this special ed diploma in hand.
I can't speak to what they might do.
Okay. But they would not be.
My suspicion is that some of them would say, I'm done.
I just wondered about the impact on that.
Only the regular diploma relieves the school system of the responsibility to provide services, to say you're now graduating, we're finished with that obligation.
And Gary, in terms of graduation rates and the federal definitions, that wouldn't count towards that, and so districts would still be appropriately incented to drive towards the graduation goals that they've set.
They will certainly be incentivized to try to get a regular diploma for students as soon as possible. And we think our plan really sets out a pretty workable solution for a large number of students.
Okay, Mike?
On 3N,
Yes.
how do these come? I know there's a legacy and we're bringing them in like it's a 2.5% increase from, but is that the sole thing that really drive it? Is there any external factors that we ever take into account when we're looking at these scales?
I don't know, Gary, you want to answer that?
I've been with the board since '94 in 2 different issues, and I've never seen anything considered except applying the percentage raise to each sale. It may well be time.
Yeah, I had discussion, I guess, with Gary and David, and I think Gary's exactly right. That's been, this has been a fixture ever since I've been associated with the board, and I think we've just, done whatever the percentage was across the board. But, I think it's time to kind of look at this. I particularly was interested in the structure there, where you got teachers and principals on one scale and system-wide folks on another scale, implying that, anybody that's a system-wide person would be on a higher structure than a principal, which, that doesn't make much sense to me. But I think we also need to recognize that the schedule is kind of the base schedule, or the BEP schedule, if you will, and kind of the funding schedule. But systems do all kinds of things different than this. This is the base, and what they do with salaries is something else.
So are these the numbers that the formula for the spread between the state and the LEA are based on, like Knox County gets 40% from the state and 60% they come up themselves? So a teacher or a principal, let's say a principal with 11 years experience will be making $49,625.
Well, that's the minimum. That's where's Steve? Steve's
But is
gonna
that the
correct me when I get this wrong. But that's the minimum floor, and then the state will pay the X percent, depending on the district BEP formula of that. And the catch is, it's actually trickier for teachers than for principals, because so many districts, most districts have some number of teachers that are not part of the BEP formula at all. So the state pays the percentage, you pay the 40% to Knox of
the coal.
That salary for the BEP funded teachers, and then Knox would have to pick up the rest of everything else.
Yeah, but it is 49.6 the number that would be distributed?
There is a set figure in the BEP formula for teacher and principal allocations for each earned position in the formula. That's a fund generation that generates dollars to go out and be allocated to LEAs. This formula is simply the sets sales for the starting block of building the salary for an individual person based on their degrees or experience. And typically, this is the state minimum salary schedule. Most of the school systems have negotiated a local supplement, both for teachers and for principals that go on top of this base.
And I would think they would.
And then for folks who are on, principals that are on 11th or 12-month contract, then there's an adjustment for those extra months of work.
So is that the $37,700 or $800 number?
That's the starting point.
That's just
That's the base.
No.
You're talking about
this is the base
On the BEP.
On the BEP.
It's
Right
it's
under
38.7, but it's going up by 2.5%, which is the next item. So it's going up to about 39.8 something.
39,849.
And one other item on
Can you
the.
imagine why I've got the RCA sticker involved with it? I mean, I understand a formula and I understand the distribution of it, I don't understand the relationship. I could understand taking a master's with 30 hours and 40, 60 in Knox County. I don't understand the relationship with 38, 37, 9. I don't understand that number.
I can try to address that, Mr. Chairman. I think you bring up a great point. There actually is not a relationship
That's
anymore.
right.
It used to be that districts were funded based on the level of experience of their teachers. But once the BEP salary went into once the salary went into the BEP as a component, then the relevance of that schedule really went away. So you recall that Governor Haslam and the department, we had legislation in place, or introduced earlier this year, to eliminate the state salary schedule. And part of the reason for that is just because there really is no longer a relationship between the BEP component and that salary schedule. But by law, we had the salary schedule in place, and as Dr. Dixon said, historically, and when you look at legislative intent, whenever the percentage increase is made on the BEP, so the 2.5% increase this year, the intent has always been that you would adjust each cell within the schedule by that same percentage. There's a philosophical discussion about whether that makes sense.
I bet there is.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question at the first meeting? This is the one that I had the biggest question mark on. And so I get to, one meeting, I guess I get to be the novice and ask the novice
This is it, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I want to piggyback off on that. So we're sitting here listening to Sarah about new standards. And we're talking about an evaluation process. And we're looking at this. This seems to be the lagger for me. If we're talking about innovation and we're talking about getting the best and the brightest, this to me seems like antiquated thinking of when you put a base in and you're talking about leadership and you're talking about an evaluation tool is only as good as who's administering the tool. If you put in front of, and I feel like I can talk from, I have a home in Unicoi County and Decatur County and Davidson County. But when you start talking about the LEAs and they're trying to figure out how they're going to figure out a salary and do all that, I don't know how creative people get with the salary, and I think there's a direct relationship between evaluations and getting bright, talented people into the pipeline, and then yet we're talking about all these innovative things, and then we go back to a formula that's the way we used to do it. Am I reading that right, or am I missing something really fundamental?
You're reading it exactly right.
Okay, that was my big, huge
Go
question
home
mark.
and tell your husband you blew him out.
I just couldn't quite make that one reconcile with the rest of what we were doing.
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
part of it is systemic in terms of the state having this salary schedule, which we think is antiquated. And by the way, is not really that normal. Most states give districts greater flexibility to create their own systems. But then the other piece is, it's just the way it's always been done. Hence, even if this goes away, we have to help districts understand how they could envision doing it differently. And I actually think it ties in directly to Mike's point that we need to increase compensation.
Yes.
But we need to increase compensation in a way that recognizes that there are differences between professionals.
So how do we fix it, Commissioner?
Huh. I'm afraid you'd ask that. Well, so first thing is I do think we need to do away with the state salary set schedule. That's a legislative question, but I don't think mandating centrally a salary step schedule makes sense. And then we need to help districts understand what are different options for how they might structure compensation so that everybody gets paid at least what they're getting paid now. But some people have the opportunity to earn more on the basis of factors that, I think most people outside the education field would say makes sense.
Is there an effective role we can play to fix it?
I don't know.
Well, I think it's going to take a good bit of staff work to get done what we're talking about here. But
Well, I was thinking more of maybe perhaps a strong resolution to the legislature that they revisit.
Well, I think
in
we
the
need to be
reasons
careful.
why.
We don't just tell them to revisit it because
Well,
Lord
we're
knows what we
suggesting
may end
that.
up with.
I-
I say Lord knows what we may end up with if we just tell them to revisit it.
Well, the governors.
Yeah.
Currently, the code requires the state board to develop a minimum salary schedule based on education level and longevity.
I would, this is a good opportunity building on that. A study came out a few weeks ago that says that across the country we spend about $14 billion a year paying for master's degrees that study after study shows do not have an impact on student performance. 14 billion. I don't know what it is in Tennessee, but it's got to be in the $100 to $200 million range annually.
Which is another reason to rework the whole thing. I, kind of where I am that, one, this schedule is really having very little impact on what's actually paid out there at the present time. I mean, not much relationship. But I think we kind of need to hold our nose, go ahead and do it one more time, see if we can't get some process, working with the legislature, that we can get a better system in place.
Yeah, I don't
This
think
is
we can
archaic.
ditch
It doesn't make any sense under everything else we're doing.
Well, it's not just the salary schedule part of the BEP, it's the whole trying to understand the BEP and its funding allocations in any sense.
But we're going to solve that problem because we're adding Mike to the BEP review committee, and it's going to solve that problem in the day. We'll get Mike to come back after these fall meetings that Scott's lined up for us and fully explain BEP.
I come in here in a walker.
Okay, good discussion. Other questions? One thing I think you'll recognize is a number of the items there at the end of the agenda, I guess really starting with 3K, we've got on final reading, but these are all items that we did not have on first reading but don't see a need to. Many of them are legislative things that we're just having to do something to implement what the legislature's already done. Okay, other questions? Any questions for Gary on the appeal items? We're spending. We've got some extremely important things that we've discussed here today. We're working on, but the appeal items and the teacher licensure action things are big part of this agenda, and certainly taking up a lot more of our staff time.
Okay, one question, Mr. Chairman, as it relates to the Great Hearts appeal and the recommendation, the staff recommendation. I'm just trying to get an understanding of once we remand it, if we remand it back to the district, where do we go from there, and what does that process look like? And who's accountable and in charge to ensure good faith implementation?
It'll be remanded back to the school board, and they will have to engage in negotiations with Great Hearts, essentially because we recommended that they have their diversity plan mirror what MPS does. They'll have to just look at that diversity plan, include that in their application, and go ahead and try to negotiate their charter agreement. After that, it'll go right into place.
I thought it was also important to understand that they have an obligation, a contractual obligation, if approved, to develop a diverse school. Failure to do so would be grounds for revocation of the charter. So there's some accountability there.
in their application, they have said that they're going to engage in diverse recruitment efforts, things like that, to make sure that their pool, because they have a blind lottery process to make sure that their pool is diverse. So if you have a diverse pool through the lottery, you know, ideally you would then have a diverse student body from that pool. So they, go ahead.
I'm just trying to get an understanding too, just that the district will move with speed too, to ensure the effective implementation of
Yes.
whatever decision we make, right?
Yes, and if you would like, I remember that we did this with Memphis, we said, you know, well, you all said, you know, approve this at your next board meeting. You can add that language in there if you would like to do that as well.
But if I read this correctly, the school board had a committee to look at this, and that committee approved it 100%.
The second, yeah.
The second time.
Yeah.
And then it was still disapproved by the board?
Yes, there's an additional, there's a review committee that they have established, and they have an office that oversees that process, and that office then sort of inserted an additional recommendation to deny it. That recommendation is what their board voted on, instead of the recommendation of the review committee.
By remanding it back to the school board, does it run the risk of the school or schools not being able to open next year?
I think they're looking at 14, 15 for opening.
They have an additional year after approval to plan and get everything in place.
And I think that's their,
That's
it sounds like that's their intent, right?
I came away from the hearing believing they were looking at 13, 14.
I did as well, but if they so choose, they can take that planning year, but I thought that they were gonna be opening 13, 14.
But it's not 12, 13.
No,
Yeah.
No, but so, all right, we're gonna remand it, or the recommendation is remand it back to the board. The board says, do these things that you gotta do anyway. At their next meeting, what does that accomplish if they're gonna do it anyway?
What does it accomplish if they have to do it anyway? Great question. You know, that's what the code says that has to happen, that's the process that statute mandates. So, you know, it has to happen anyway, they're gonna do it. I mean,
So if they don't do it, what if it goes to the school district and they choose not to take a positive vote on it? Where are we then?
we're looking at probably court action, sort of an injunction that I'm sure that Great Hearts will go ahead and initiate. But at this point, we are out of it. Once you guys make your decision, you've done what the law requires, and then MPS has to do what you guys recommend happen. We've never had that case. I doubt that they would do that, because I mean it sort of drags out this process even further than I think anyone desires for it to be dragged out to. So we've never had that. I doubt it will happen in this case.
Is it conceivable that Great Hearts might say that they could not comply with the requirements we set out?
Yes.
And pull themselves out?
Yes, because essentially they thought they applied for 5 schools. They may not be happy if you all tell them they can only open 1. So they have the option to withdraw their application and go somewhere else.
It brings up one more question for me then. You know, when you say that legally we can only approve 1.
1 school per application.
So we're counting this as 1 application for 1 school.
Yes.
Like in Memphis where we've approved.
They applied for
separate applications?
Right, they applied to open 9 schools using 9 different applications. Now, a lot of the information was the same across applications, and so in the recommendation, it also states that Metro could create a process where, you know, they could have 5 different applications, but one, like application 2 might say, see application 1 for the information if it's the same. But in this case, there was not enough detail provided in 2 through 5 for the review committee to actually make good analysis on whether or not the rest of those schools could open. So they really only applied for one.
So they could have an abbreviated process
They
going
could,
forward,
yes.
though. That was
Yes.
in your recommendation, as a possibility.
Can I ask a question on that? Because Rich Haglund isn't here. Is Rich here?
No.
He was trying to talk me through some of this. It looked through from some of the process like Great Hearts was intending to apply for 5 schools, and basically Metro didn't help them. Metro led them down this path where it looked like they thought they were applying for 5, and then they get to the end and it's, oh, whoops, actually you were only applying for 1.
Metro requested them to complete a replication supplement, which really asked them to identify their capacity to open multiple schools using in what network. And so it did kind of give them the impression that by completing that replication supplement, that they were applying for 5. But again, in their original application, the enrollment projections, the budget, the structure of the school only described 1 school. The replication supplement did not provide enough detail for the additional schools. It asked for the name of the schools, sort of what population those schools would serve, where they would be located, but not enough detail like the initial application, which only provided data for that 1 school.
And there's no way to, in the remand, ask Metro to expedite the review process of the remaining schools, given that Great Hearts intended to apply for more, but didn't really get help in the process.
The board certainly could, in their remanding, add that in there. That's something.
Could we require them to do that?
You could. You could require them to. Well, the thing about it is the application window for this time is closed, so they would have to go through next year and undergo the application cycle next year, but it could be abbreviated based upon what they've done this year.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be remand to say that they have to approve it, but it just seems, I don't know, something seems a little wrong about making them have to wait a full year and go through a long process when they were trying to do it this year and didn't get any help.
But their intent has only been to, regardless of what the application said, to only open 1 school in the 2013-14.
Right.
Correct.
And they were going to open an additional school every year after that.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be in a worse off position than to go through this next cycle and apply, but using an abbreviated process. So it wouldn't put them in a detrimental position to do that.
You know, this, in general, this application process is adversarial by nature. We're asking someone to apply for something to someone who is, in all likelihood, an adversary. It is not a third-party objective viewer. And then Gary gets stuck with having to be in a hour-long hearing, when really, if you're looking at a real product, a real charter school, you would think that the district and the applicant would work over some period of time back and forth to really work through the problems and to come up with a really good that meets the needs and stuff. It's almost like saying, all right, we're gonna tell them what's wrong with it this time. We're gonna send it back to them. They'll send it back to us. We'll come up with a few more things to put in there that we didn't mention the first time, and we'll deny it, and then it comes to us. It's kind of like we're watching the same movie over and over and over again. I bet I know how the next movie's going to turn out. It doesn't seem. It seems like I bet there's some other areas, other states that do it maybe.
There are other states that have a state authorized. So, but that's a legislative thing. There are other states where they just people can apply straight charters do apply straight to a state authorizer, which is an independent entity on its own making the decision. And then there's not the sort of appeal process with the state board spending its time and energy on the appeal process. But, you know, that's not a direction that we've gone here.
The other thing to note, though, is that out of the several applications that Metro Nashville, for instance, received, they received 11. The majority of those either were approved or denied, and they did not come to the state board. So it's really for those districts that have great processes and they're implemented with fidelity, we never see those. It's those rare instances where, you know, people are just hell-bent on denying it that we get them. But in this case, in most cases, they are properly vetted and go through, you know, pretty good avenue of approval.
I think in this case, it's very fair to say that Metro Nashville has a really good process for reviewing these and have approved a lot. You know, we've got a lot more problem in some of the districts that are just anti-charter schools, don't have a process or don't have a good process, and they only put, you know, the system-wide people on the review committee, and, you know, that's where we really run into problems with the approval process. And, you know, I think in this one, you know, it's just that this particular situation is a little bit of an outlier in terms of the process that Metro Nashville has been using. One other thing too, you know, I think, you know, I think y'all got all kinds of emails just like I did on both sides of this issue. All of them well written, you know, thoughtful, and it wasn't, you know, 2-sentence type things. It was 2 or 3 page type things, and it weren't form letters. They were well done notes, but you know, to a large extent, the ones that were anti or saying to uphold the school board were addressing the issues that we have provided in the stipulations here. So, you know, to some extent, we're being responsive to the emails that we got on both sides of this, really. You know, but diversity, 1 school versus 5 schools, and also the licensed teachers were kind of the major issues. Transportation was occasionally in there, but other than that, you know, we were addressing the issues that were identified in the, you know, very good emails that we got concerning this approval.
Well, and I wanted to point out, and Gary, you might speak to this too, that I believe that Metro Nashville school system has really quite a good track record as far as the way they proceed with these applications. And they have a program, a department that works with the charter schools as they develop it. And I think they've already approved 15 to 19 charters that will be in effect this year. So it's not like they're not approving charters on some sort of basis just because it's a charter school. I also do think that we are in a new time, a new transition period with our charter legislation changing this last year. I think there's a lot of still misunderstanding about who's to be certified charter schools and what that population will look like in the future. It's not going to look like what it looked like last year.
This is an open enrollment school. The majority of, most of, not all of the other charters are focusing on a particular group of children, whether they be under low achieving, at risk, from low achieving schools. But in this school, it's open to anyone in Davidson County who would like to apply.
It's lottery, right?
It's the lottery.
So this would be the first one out of the new legislation.
That's correct.
And that's what, that may be what doesn't sit well with Metro Nashville.
From what I've from the research that I've done, I mean, it appears as if this is a high-quality application with an organization that has a track record. Is that right?
We have several applications to measure it up against. They are one of the better ones, and they do have a track record. Now, you know, looking at Arizona, it's a bit of, are we comparing apples to apples, apples to oranges here about what their state requires versus how it would be
suspect it'll be quite an eye-opening experience if they're approved to deal with value added that they've never dealt with before. Previously, I think they've dealt with attainment scores, percent proficient. So value added will be a new twist.
I suggested to Dr. Nixon we refer this to T-Dot.
Okay, other,
Well, again, my biggest concern about it is, maybe you assign committees, and committees do their job, and then you throw the committees out. That's the biggest problem, I guess, that I saw, and it was get people who concentrated on looking at this and looking at it clearly, and came with a recommendation, and then just said, I'm not gonna do that. Why have a committee? That was the issue I had, you know,
That's part of their good process.
that's a problem.
I guess it's not clear what the board, when they voted to deny the application, the Metro Nashville Board, what they understood about the recommendation of the review committee. Based on the minutes anyway, which suggested maybe they didn't know that the review committee had unanimously approved the application.
Whether they knew or didn't know, you know, the minutes reflected one thing. I don't know whether there was actual knowledge or, you know, constructive, but it, like I said, in reviewing it, it became clear to us that there was a step added in here.
I mean, for me, and I'm not casting votes, but for me, our priority number 2 is improve kids' access to excellent schools. And this organization has a better track record of success than any organization that has come up on appeal during my time here.
Okay, other questions, comments about Great Hearts, or anything else on the agenda that got questions about? Anything else? We'll save them for tomorrow. Okay.
We will still be hearing from, Mr. Payne.
Will Mr. Payne be attending?
Tomorrow.
We will not hear from him,
Mr.
correct?
Payne's attorney will be there, but she has submitted a brief, and as well I have, just, you know, for your purposes to review. He will not be speaking.
Do we have that? Do we have her brief and your brief?
Yes, there is there is a.
Okay, other items. Anything else?
I would just relate to charter schools and also relate to us. If you read the Tennessean this morning, you may have seen the article about our very own Art Fuller opening his school at Knowledge Academies over in Southeast Nashville. So if you get a chance to read that, it's a pretty nice, 700 or 800 word article about Knowledge Academies. Make good. We're proud of Art.
Okay, anything else? With that, the meeting is adjourned. We will, okay, Kevin?
I'll have the van at the hotel at 10 after 5, so anyone who'd like to be picked up.
10 after 5, van at hotel for dinner.
If it's a draw, my 14-month-old is going to make a guest appearance.
Oh, cool. Okay. Maybe he can explain to me. Yeah, right.